What's up, everybody? This time we've got Melitta on the show, and she's a total introvert that built an amazing network and has become known for that, and is now inspiring other women entrepreneurs out there to find their voice, own who they are, and really step up. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I can't wait for you to listen because I think you're going to pull away a lot of information. Whether you're a female entrepreneur or a male entrepreneur, there's something in here for everybody. So let's see what she has to say. Welcome, everybody, to another great episode of the Gooyow Now Show. I'm your host, Bob McIntosh, and today I have Melitta with us, and I'm pretty excited. We were just having a brief conversation, and she shared a little bit about herself, and I'm not going to steal her thunder or her story because I want her to share it, but I think this is going to be a great conversation, especially for the female listeners. She deals a lot with female empowerment and women in business, but this is not to say that, hey, for the guys, you shouldn't be listening to this episode. Actually, what we're going to talk a little bit about is, how female empowerment is happening and some other things like that. I'm excited for this. Again, I was referred to Melitta by another friend of mine, and the cool thing, as you know, if you've been listening to this show for a while, is I love having awesome conversations and in all kinds of different spaces. So, we've had people on from a very, very wide range of spaces, because at the end of the day, this show is about getting out of your own way. And to do that, we've got to have a depth, if you will, of experiences to pull from, because not every single episode that you listen to is going to be 100% relevant to who you are, where you're at, or what you're doing. But I always go into every episode of a podcast I listen to with, can I take one thing away? And if I can take one thing away, then this has been a time well spent, and I'm excited to have this. So Melitta, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm really excited.
Perfect. So for everyone listening, tell us a little bit about who you are, some of your background, and we'll go from there.
Gosh, I'll try and keep it short. So I'm Melitta. I'm based in Switzerland, Europe right now. I'm originally from the UK, and Today, I'm a business coach. I work predominantly with female entrepreneurs and consultants to really help them to communicate their value, market themselves with meaning, and build a business that has an impact they're proud of.
And that's awesome. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, is communicating their value. And I say a lot of people, I'm speaking for myself too. Like, I know, especially when I got started, I was terrible at that. Like, it's like, oh, well, I can, it's wavering. So I think for a lot of us, we're out of our depth when we start our businesses. And so in my opinion, it leads to a lot of devaluation of what we have. And sometimes it just takes a third party to come in and say, hey, no, you're good. You got this. You can do it. So it sounds like that's sort of what you do.
Yeah, I see that a lot with my clients. And very often, I would say at least 50% of the time, what they start with as seeing as their weakness or something that's completely irrelevant ends up being the one thing that's their big strength, the thing that other people come to them for. And it's just amazing how many times that happens. It happened just this week with a lady that, she had this amazing creative background, an area that she'd worked in for 15 years, but then she felt really embarrassed about that when she moved into corporate. So she never talked about it. And then she became very corporate. And now she's an entrepreneur, and she's working in a creative field, helping startups. And I was like, well, this creative background's incredible, because that really adds a lot of value and credibility to what you're doing. And she's like, really? And suddenly when we started talking about it, she was a different person altogether. And we bury a lot of our value and we're blind to it very often. And sometimes it's things that are just so easy and natural for us. We don't see them as being highly valuable to other people as well. So it's really good to always get those external reflections, either from a coach or mentor, or just going to your network and asking them. So there's lots of different sources we can tap into, but I think that external perspective is always so important.
I couldn't agree more. One of the things my business partner Gigi always talks about is she's like, Bob, you have so much knowledge about internet marketing and technology, but like so what you think is super basic for you and maybe not interesting to everybody else is like, whoa, wait a second, that's crazy to them, right? And it took, like you said, that external perspective a lot of times of her like banging it into my head, because I'm sometimes I'm a little stubborn, don't listen, but you know, it took her banging it into my head for me to go, oh, okay, I'm starting to see that. So I think that's great. So I want to talk about something that you mentioned before our interview started, which was, and you briefly mentioned it here, which was moving from, you know, the UK, you said London, I believe, to Switzerland. But specifically, there was two things in there that I want to talk about, because I think these are going to be super relevant to the right people listening. One is you had no network when you moved to Switzerland, so you didn't really know anybody there. And two is that you're very introverted. And so I would love to know from you, how did that go? Like, and the reason that I asked this is I've been asked a number of times, because I've moved now 3 times to cities where I've known absolutely nobody at all, and I have a lot of people asking me like, that's crazy, how would you do that? And I have my answer, but I'd love to know for you, like, as an introverted person moving to a place where you don't know anybody, how did that go? Like, what was the process? Was it scary for you? Like, I have so many more questions, but let's start there.
I think it wasn't necessarily scary at first, because I hadn't really thought through the practicalities of moving to another country where the culture is very different. You don't know anyone, and the language is different. And it was only when I got here, and suddenly I spent the first 3 months pretty much on my own. My husband had his job. I did have a job to go to, but I had to figure out my work permits in between. So I was on my own, and I was like, and this was before we had Wi-Fi and things, so I didn't have internet. I didn't have WhatsApp. So I was playing, what was it, Squares on my computer. That was the TV. We didn't have Netflix, so the TV was only in French, and I didn't speak French at that point. So I really needed to get out and make friends, and it was hard, because where do you start when you don't know anything? And
Exactly.
I had one lucky coincidence that there was a lady in the block of flats where I moved to who noticed that there's an English sounding name appeared on one of the mailboxes, and she was American, and she plucked up the courage to kind of knock on my door and say, hello, do you speak English? Because she had recently moved herself and was feeling a lot of the same ways, and she was very shy, so it took her 2 weeks to pluck up the courage to knock on the door. And then that was it. We ended up hanging out, and together we had, it made us more courageous. And there were a few networks she'd heard of that we could perhaps go and try it together, because she was too scared to go on her own. So that worked out perfectly. So part of it was a happy coincidence. But when I started working professionally, I realized very quickly that everything in Switzerland is done through networking. It's all the jobs go through your professional network, opportunities, everything. So I had to start networking, and it was something that I've always successfully avoided before. I grew
up. I think a lot of people are like that. They're like networking, and they get like they make it like this bigger picture of terrifying things. Like it's like a horror movie coming out.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd totally done that. And so I really pushed myself to go out and start going to some networks. I asked some of my colleagues, where do you go to meet people, and stumbled on a couple of English speaking ones, which was great to start with. I was working in Geneva at the time, and you've got the whole UN quarter there, so there's a big English speaking community, which was great. So I was able to tap into that. So that was at least one thing that was a bit easier. But I was going to these networking events, and on the way I was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be terrible. I'm going to spill my drink over someone. I'm going to stumble on my words, the worst mindset you could possibly have. And then, of course, because I was going into it feeling that way, then that was my reality, right? So I had this awful time. And then I got the train home telling myself, you were so stupid. You said that. You should have said this. And, terrible. And then I decided it wasn't working. It was miserable, but I had to figure it out. So I started there was a lady at work who was, she loved networking. She went networking before work, lunchtime, after work, in the evenings, at the weekends. So like, great, can I shadow you? Can I come with you to some events and see how she does it? So I did that for a while, and it was quite nice because I didn't have to introduce myself because she did it for me. So that part was easy. But after going to a few events, I realized, I was never going to be her. I could never network the way she did, because she was
Right.
very extroverted, a very different character. And none of what she did felt good to me. I would have to become someone else to network her way. And I was like, that's not going to work for me. So I went
Be
back to
very
the drawing board.
inauthentic.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you're not showing up as your true self, you're not going to make the right connections. You're not going to feel confident, and you're always going to have that kind of imposter syndrome. Someone's going to find me out anytime, because you're not being yourself.
Right.
So it's not a good position to go into any situation with. So I started to think again, and then I got invited to a leadership a training event, and part of that we had to do the self-coaching and just pick a problem and then figure out what would you do to overcome this. I thought, right, great, I'm going to pick networking. And when I started to take a different view of that, I started to think, well, what would make me feel comfortable? And I started to create my own rules. So if I only went to a networking event for 10 minutes and just smiled, had one conversation with someone, and if that was enough, if I had no more energy left to give, or I just was feeling awkward, I could leave. To always leave on a high, never let myself like step over that, because with introverts, it's anything novel or new depletes our energy quite quickly. So being in a situation like networking, where you're having all these conversations with people that are new, you can become very, very exhausted very quickly. So the more you do it, the more you build up your energy reserves, because it isn't so novel over time. You do start to find your
Tolerance.
yeah, and you build your confidence and everything along the way as well. So that was my rule. It was okay if I just stayed for a little while, and I had a few other rules as well. And then I also looked at, well, what were my obstacles? And so what were the things that were going to make me feel shy or awkward, or like I want to run away? And how
Right.
could I, in advance, I knew what was going to come up typically, like just walking in the door up to the reception desk. That was always the part that was really nerve-wracking. So what could I do already to plan ahead to make sure that didn't feel so bad? So I was like, okay, well, I could have a real rocking playlist that I listen to on the way, so I feel a bit more courageous. Or I could go with a friend, or I could go to the bathroom first and do some power poses, the little things that I could do. And the funny thing was that when I had these plans, so if this happens, I'll do that, that thing never happened in the first place. I never really had to use any of these contingency plans, because I kind of already knew it was okay. I can cope with things. And I discovered that confidence doesn't come from knowing you can do something. It comes from knowing you can figure it out, that whatever happens, you'll survive. You've got the tools and resources available. And so I think that advanced planning built that kind of belief in myself as well, that it was all going to be okay. So all of these little things I put together, I've called it my victory formula. So it's the first half.
I like that.
Because it starts with like your vision, intention, courage, and being yourself, and having those obstacles, creating your own rules, and then reminding yourself that, yeah, you can do this. So it goes into a lot more depth in the book, of course, but it was really my little plan. And suddenly I started to really relax and start enjoying networking. And I started to meet some really nice people. And I realized that it really isn't that scary after all. And it suddenly changed me completely. And then I got known for my network, and was starting to be invited to places to talk about how I built a network. And I was like, really? So
it's like full circle, from nothing to everything, and then being asked how to do that. But that's super powerful. I think people undervalue building a great network and working on that, and especially for introverted people, it seems monumental. It's like trying to scale Everest, and for most of them.
Yeah, but what I think I've learned from my experience, and actually I've met a lot of other introverts who are amazing networkers, and I think we actually have a lot of skills that like we said at the beginning, a lot of our strengths we don't recognize. And as introverts, we may feel initially that networking is really scary for us, but actually we have so much to offer, because we tend to listen more. And most of the introverts I've met and myself, we're reflectors. We like to listen and reflect and think, and then add something meaningful to that. And giving people that space it's just something so valuable you can offer. And it's something that extroverts can't do that. They conduct themselves in a very different way. So it is a really nice way for us to stand out. So it's, I think we really underestimate our superpower. And I think, and as you say, once you have a network, I've got speaking opportunities. I've launched 3 businesses at 0 cost, thanks to my network. I've made amazing partnerships, and I've met people who can really support my business, support me personally. It's just given me so much from my network. It's definitely something I can recommend investing time in developing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So if I could kind of summarize, it's really just, hey, take little baby steps each step of the way and figure out what rules are going to make sense for you. So I'm curious, what you said you had a few other rules. What were those? Because I think for others out there, that might be helpful to have at least even if they don't copy the rules, they say, oh, okay, I can see where the mindset was in the creation of those rules.
Yeah. So one of them was to do something every day that scares you. And I've since learned that this was actually Eleanor Roosevelt's quote, and she was a classic introvert who hated networking and public speaking, but actually in the end became very well known for her public speaking and networking. So I like to think that this was perhaps the rule that helped her too. So when I say do something every day that scares you, this wasn't things like jumping out of a plane. It was pick up the phone instead of emailing someone. So I could build that trust, that confidence, that trust in my skills, that trust that, hey, I can speak to people. And even if I feel nervous, it's okay. And the sky doesn't fall down and no one else can see how I feel. And invite people. So I tried to start inviting some of the colleagues around the bank that I'd been seeing on a regular basis and smiling at, actually invite them for lunch or a coffee and actually get to know them. So I started doing that on a regular basis, and it was great. I met some amazing people. In fact, one of the ladies I met then encouraged me to go to Toastmasters with her, which then led me to start public speaking, which led me to learn how to speak up more at meetings, which led me to really get promoted several times over, because I was being more visible, more credible, getting better results. And that led me to start a women's network within with the bank to help more women speak up, which is kind of part of the route of where I got to today. So those you just never know where each connection is going to take you. And that's really exciting. But it's only kind of with hindsight you see that. I've been invited.
It's always best to have hindsight. It's the best kind of sight, right? Like it's even better than 2020.
Yeah, exactly. I've become a TEDx speaker coach for 2 different events from my network. I was invited to get involved in some really exciting projects through my network. You never know where it's going to take you. So doing something every day that scares me was part of it. Really creating my own rules, going at whatever felt good to me was good. Not feeling under pressure to perform this way or that way, and to really follow up and do things in the way that suited me and at my pace. It was really taking that. The big thing was to take away the pressure, take away that feeling that I had to do it this way or I had to perform that way, and really to build those skills step by step was really the kind of basis of all of my rules, really.
I like it. Basically building a frame and feeling free to wander around in that frame wherever you want to, but still having the frame to know that you're going the right direction. I love it.
Yeah, cool. Exactly.
So I want to talk a little bit more about as well, sort of, women in leadership and women in the business role. So I know you said, hey, like being out there and networking and all of that has helped you create the opportunity for you to get promoted a bunch more times, and then became sort of the root of what you do right now, which is, helping people find their voice and, communicate their value. And so I know, again, when we were talking beforehand, you said when you moved to Switzerland, you said it kind of felt like, 1970s. It was still very, maybe, not women friendly and especially in the business sense. So I'd love to know more in terms of like, how do you combat that? Because I feel like even here in the States, which most of my listeners are in the States, and even though we have more acceptance of women, I think, than we've ever had at any period in time, there is still that gap. There's still sometimes, and I think there's a lot of perception issues, particularly on women. And this is my point of view, and I could be totally wrong on this, but from my point of view, there's a lot of perception women's issues for a lot of women that, it's difficult to bridge that gap, or it's difficult to take that step forward, or it's difficult to make that happen. So I'd love to know more from you, because obviously not only have you taken that step, you've actually successfully done it and executed, and now you're helping others. So I'd love to know more about that. And I want to frame what you're about to say real quick. For the guys listening, you might say, oh, well, this is not relevant to me. I want you to listen to what she says and say, hey, if I see a woman trying to do this, or can I support a woman doing this, whether it be your wife, a friend, or whoever. Like, for example, one of my very good friends just launched her book, and I'm like, I don't even know what's in the book, but like, I know who she is at her core and her being. So I'm going to promote the heck out of it for her, because A, she's a good friend. B, I know she's going to deliver good value, and I want to help her do better, not just because she's a woman, but also because she's my friend. But so for guys, like, pay attention too, because I think there's a lot that you can learn from this, from your side, to have better perception in this space.
Yeah, and I think it's quite interesting. I do work with men, and I've worked alongside a lot of male leaders, because there weren't enough women. But my experience, at least, is that when I started a women's network at the bank where I worked, because private banking was really very male dominated, still is, I think. But it's
definitely is.
Things have definitely changed, but they are going very slow. But the men I've come across really want to promote their women more. And when I created this women's network at the bank, so I got promoted, and I got to a point where I was reporting directly to the CEO. I didn't have a clue, if I'm honest, about banking. And I was a female, and I wasn't local. I wasn't Swiss. I didn't speak the local language. So I went to my CEO and I was like, I think I'm quite a good example of the fact that you can build your career when you're clueless and a woman. And I thought that would be a really nice message to give to the other women in the bank. And I'd love to start a women's network to kind of give them a space where they can come together, discuss the challenges, support each other, and see if we can start changing the culture. And he was like, I'm in. So the CFO of the organization became my mentor for that project, because we wanted it to be, we didn't want it to be seen as like a HR thing or a women's thing. We wanted it to be a credible, this is a big strategic move for the business. So having the CFO and the CEO as kind of the backers of my project really helped send that message. And he was really, you want to do this step by step, but get the engagement, get the buy-in. Don't do a big rah-rah. And, we want to build this from the inside out. We really want to change the hearts and minds of people, which was, as an introvert, was actually, he was introverted as well, but that suited me perfectly, having these smaller conversations rather than a big launch. But what I found, because I opened it was a women's network, but it was open to men as well. I thought it was really important that they were part of the discussion. And the men I spoke to every single time were 100% behind it, and really wanted to know for themselves, well, how do we promote these women? We know we've got smart women, but we don't know how to promote them, and we don't have the confidence that they will speak up and represent our department if we were to promote them. So we are, if you can help them gain courage, we're all for it. It was actually a lot of the women that were the ones that were like, oh, this is just rubbish, we don't want anything to do with it. So that was a big shock. But anyway, but what I discovered was, when I went back to the men to ask them what they got from the network after it'd been running for sort of 8 months or so, for them, it was the first time they'd ever seen women speaking up, ever seen women owning a space and saying, this is what we need and this is what we can do, and starting to work together to create something and make a change. And we made a huge difference I ran it for 2 years before I left, because to start my own business. And so that was a real insight for me, that yes, companies have to change, policies have to change, mindsets have to change, cultures need to shift. But one of the biggest shifts has to be with us, the women ourselves. We need to take responsibility for our own personal development, for speaking up, for building our courage, for building that network. And very often we just assume, oh, it's not our place, we're not allowed to speak up. And sometimes for some women, their experience is that they have been told one time too many, oh, you can't do that, you're a girl. And it's kind of stuck with them. But that's not everyone's experience. That was definitely never my experience in business. I've had some incredible mentors who were always men. So I think, but one thing women do need is a lot of encouragement. Yes, you can do this, because we've been told repeatedly throughout history that we don't have that place. So I think for men, just to confirm, you do have this place. I do believe in you. You can speak up, and to give that safe space for women to try and to step up. They will always be rewarded, because women will always step up and do a phenomenal job. So I always thought it was quite interesting, this pay gap, because women work harder and get paid less, known. So why is anyone ever employing men? It doesn't make sense. But I think
good point.
But I do think it comes down to women not owning their voice and not speaking up enough. And when I started learning, I went to Toastmasters, built my personal my speaking skills. That's when I started speaking up more in meetings. And the incredible thing was, people started listening and responding. It's like, oh, this is new.
Absolutely.
Before I thought people were ignoring me because I'm a woman. And then I realized, no, they were ignoring me because I wasn't being clear. I wasn't being firm. I wasn't being confident in my opinions. And so people could sense a bit of doubt in me. And so they didn't have that confidence. So as soon as we build that confidence, build some of those skills, then it snowballs really, really quickly. So partly, yes, men can definitely make it a nice, safe, encouraging environment for women. But also we need to take a lot more ownership, I think, ourselves.
That's awesome. And real quick, in case any of you listening aren't aware, Toastmasters is a great organization around the entire world that helps people develop their speaking skills and their leadership skills. I know when I first started getting invited to speak on stages, I went to Toastmasters as well. And it definitely helped me work on a lot of things that I wasn't aware of, because again, having that third party perspective is very important. So I want to talk about something that you said, because I think this is unique, maybe not totally unique, but just an interesting perspective, which is, you said, so you started building this women's network, in your organization. And as part of that, you said, we want the men in because we want them to be a part of this conversation. Now, a lot of times I see, I would say more often than not, I see people say, no, it's just, this is for women only, for them to feel safer here. I'm curious, what was the mindset behind it? I know you said, hey, you kind of wanted them to be aware of this, but, was there any negative feedback in having the men there from the women specifically? And, or was there, did they feel like it was, less safe or less encouraging environment because they were there? And how did you frame it so that the men felt like, hey, this is, they're not coming in just like saying like, I'm in charge of this meeting now?
Yeah. So, gosh, I don't know. I don't recall anyone ever questioning it. But when I was saying what I wanted to create, it was like, well, this is a women's network from the perspective of a way to bring women together and help them have a network, because every department had like 60 men and 2 women. So we were all fragmented across the organization. There were no natural networks. So to help them have more networks across the bank, which would help with efficiencies and it worked brilliantly from that perspective. But I didn't believe we could create an inclusive community and workplace by being exclusive. I thought, well, that kind of goes against the whole idea. So I said, it has to be open to men. We had I'd say about 15% men came, and to be honest, some of them, about half of them were there because they genuinely wanted to understand how they could better support the women in their teams. The other half were there because they knew that the CFO and CEO were behind it, and they would look good. I was like, okay,
showing face, as we call it.
Yeah, I'll take it. But actually, it was really interesting to get their feedback on how it felt for them as men to be part of it. And I think the women understood that the men were still the leaders. We had one female director, and she was the head of HR, which unfortunately doesn't really carry much weight within the organization. So if we wanted things to change, we had to have the decision makers there, and they were still men. So we needed them to be there to make change happen. We couldn't really get far without them. So that was one way of looking at it, and the women totally understood that. But also we wanted to involve them in the conversation, because if we were having a discussion about, well, how do we make sure we can leave the office at 5 on the dot so we can pick up our kids without feeling guilty, because a lot of the men didn't have that responsibility and they were working, and you'd feel bad walking out. Then we could involve the guys in that situation and say, hey, look, what would you suggest? This is how we feel. This is the kind of situation. A lot of them, they weren't even aware of it. Well, we never thought about it that way. And actually, there's probably a lot of men in the department that would also like to be able to leave at 5. So, well, let's make it more of a public declaration. No one is expected to stay after 5. If you do, that's your own choice. It's not going to help you get more bonus. And so then it became part of the policy that, the end of the working day was 5. That's important because everyone needs rest. They need time with their family. We respect that. And then a lot of people were even told, leave your work phone here when you go on holiday. We will not contact you because you need time off. So it really worked for everybody in the bank, and it really sparked these conversations about what had become the norm, but just through assumption. No one had ever said, oh, it has to be this way. It's just everyone had kind of looked one way and the other. Oh, everyone else is doing this, so I should do the same. And we were able to start challenging some of those assumptions and make it just a better working environment for everybody. And the whole bank, it was just really creating a beautiful shift for everybody, and everyone became more productive, happier. It was just all upside, really.
That's awesome. And I think, it's funny. I've supported a couple of, I'll say female only groups, and I've been a part of a couple of male only groups. And there's always, there's a benefit to that for sure. But it has always felt to me like there's a little bit lacking, like there's a piece missing in whatever you do there. And so it's interesting to hear that perspective of that. So from there, so obviously, you did a lot of work with this. You helped it, and eventually you ended up, I believe you said you had kids, and it became more important for you to take care of family. So you started your business. And so now you you help women basically create their voice. Do you attribute a lot of what you do now to essentially helping them find their voice in that company, and that's sort of where it spawned from, and that's where the idea came from, or was it something else?
Yeah, I think so. Partly that experience. When I started my own business, I wanted to continue with what I'd started at the bank with that women's network. But this is where I got in my own way. I was like, well, who am I to do that? And at the time I was 32, and I'd always been told, well, you're only 32. So I was like, well, I'm not credible. I'm too young. And looking back, I was like, of course I was credible. What a crazy thing to think. But, it was fine. I had a 5-month-old baby, no support network. And so I was exhausted. So it was fine to start where I felt comfortable, and that's good. So I started as a communication consultant, and I started working with lots of them. It felt a bit surreal because I was writing speeches and briefings and articles that got published in some of the most renowned papers and magazines around the world on behalf of some of the most powerful men in the world, while bouncing a 5-month-old baby under my desk. It's like, if they knew.
If only people knew, right? Like, if only they knew.
Exactly. It's just kind of like, if I ran the world, what would I want to? What would I want to hear this person say? And they always loved it, so that was great. But it was great. But I did start to burn out because I didn't create my business. I didn't have the boundaries. That's another area where I think we get in our own way, is that we feel we have to give too much of ourselves. And I've since learned from a good friend of mine who's a behavioral psychologist that when we create boundaries and we look after ourselves and our priorities first, it's not being selfish, it's being self-full. And I think that was the biggest lesson I learned from that first business, is stay true to your vision and values, have courage to build a business around that and what's meaningful for you, and protect your time and energy so that you have that space to be creative and give the best of yourself to everybody, your clients, your family, and yourself. That was really really key. So I started to burn out and started to think about, well, what else could I do if I wasn't doing this consultancy? What would I do? And that's when women started to come forward and say, well, can you help me with my business? And I was like, no, I can't do that. And then I remember there was
the best introvert answer. No, I can't do that.
Yeah, it's like really ridiculous. And then one lady, she was like, she got really quite forceful, and she was, but you're the only one that could help me. And it's like, okay, well, and I had a coffee just as it's like, well, what are her challenges? And I realized that she didn't know how to set clear goals and plans that she believed in. She didn't know how to communicate her value. She didn't know where to start with marketing and to do that in a way that felt meaningful. And she just dreaded sales. I mean, that was a whole like a swear word in her vocabulary. And she didn't know how to prioritize and kind of get things done and ring fence her time. And I thought, these are 3 areas that I really am the expert in. I definitely can help with this. So that's when I thought, okay, well, let me take a step back, sort of break down all my experience, pull it back together and see if I can put something together that was going to really have an impact and get results. So I did that. And then I went to my network and said, hey, this is what I'm doing now, and got 4 clients instantly. It's like, okay, that's a sign that I'm on the right path. And that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years. And it's just been a very different experience to my first business. I think I needed that first business to be able to do this one, to kind of introduce me to what I really needed to know and how I could really help people and start to believe in my skills and abilities. So I don't think I'd be where I am now without that experience. But I think having this particular, what I do now has brought all of my experiences from my career, from the Women's Network, from finding my voice, from becoming a speaker, from doing the consultancy, and bringing all of that together to help others just feels amazing.
That's awesome. Okay, so I want to ask you about this. You said, and this is, I think this is the crux of where I think a lot of people get stuck. So you said, okay, well, no, I can't do that, right? So she asked you, can you help me with my business? She's like, nope, I can't do that. But then at some point you started going through all of your experiences. You said you pulled all those together and you said, okay, this is what I could do. What was that conversation like with yourself? Because I would imagine that there was like still some mental pushback of, no, you can't do this. You're not ready. You don't have enough experience or something of that nature. Or was it the opposite? Was it like, oh, now that I see all of this, like, did you write it out? Were you like, what was your process for pulling all this together and then making that decision to move forward with this as your new idea?
I think the answer to this comes back to something we talked about right at the very beginning, that you can't see your value on your own. And so by this point, I discovered business coaches, which in my first business, I didn't know business coaches existed. And I think, if I'm honest, even if I did, I probably wouldn't have thought that I was ready for one or deserved one or whatever.
Right.
But, towards the end of my consultancy, I started to discover what business coaches did. And so when I started to pivot and thought, maybe I could do this, that was my first move, get a business coach. And they were able to help me with that process. And so by working with a business coach, instead of spending a year or more, probably figuring everything out and bringing it together, they were able to help me do that in 3 months, to really build out a solid
accelerated your time frame.
Yeah, exactly. And getting that confirmation, that challenge at every time, like really, well, yeah, I think you could probably go deeper here. You could do more with that. That comes afterwards, you linking things together. So it felt logical to me and to my clients. And then just say, right, go on then, you're ready to get out there. Yeah, exactly. You kind of need that a little bit. So that was the secret there, was to get a business coach. And I've never been without a coach ever since. And I think it's really so important. Even if you can't afford a business coach, find some kind of membership, or through your network, find some kind of mentor, somebody who is there alongside you along the way, because I really feel you need that.
Perfect. So let me ask you this: when you were like, okay, I'm going to need a coach. How do you know what coach to pick? Like, what were you like? Hey, I'm looking for someone that's going to help me do this specific thing, or like a general thing. And I'm asking more because, I think for a lot of folks, they might go, oh, well, do I need a specific coach in a specific thing? Is it more broad, especially if they're just getting started or their ideas blooming, or if they're not being able to find their, their creative voice and say, oh, I'm worthy of being able to do this?
Yeah, I think I only actually spoke to one coach, which I would recommend people speak to 2 or 3 at least to really get a feel for what different, because every business coach is different. They all have different experiences, different values, a different outlook. But actually, the one I found was perfect. And I found her at 3 o'clock in the morning because when you have an idea and you just like, right, that's it. And I just couldn't sleep. I thought, right, that's it. I'm going to get up. And I was like searching on the internet for business coaches, but it was very clear. I wanted someone who believed in my mission to only work to work predominantly with women. That's where I wanted to start. And I wanted someone that could help me turn my knowledge into a signature system. So I knew my first step in my business was to do that, to run it as a one-to-one program so that I could then kind of see how people interacted with my materials, with my method, with my structure, refine that, and then move it into like a group and a membership and so on after that. But just to start with one thing. And searching on the internet, this one particular coach was the only person that really stood out as ticking all of those boxes. So I booked a call with her. We really hit it off, and we started 2 days later. So it actually became very quick. But she was actually the perfect coach for me at that time. But I think it was that clarity of knowing your vision, your values, and your first step.
Exactly. And I think that's huge. I see a lot of people being like, well, I'm going to hire a coach. I'm like, okay, what are they going to coach you on? And they're like, success. And I'm like, well, let's get a little more defined there, because there's a lot of facets to that. So that's perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. So this has been a great conversation, and I particularly enjoy what you're doing and helping in the female niche specifically. It's been fascinating. A lot of the conferences I've gone to and things of that have started to feature women, and it's interesting. I remember one of the first times I went to a female. I forget the name of it. It was a panel of females that all very successful entrepreneurs. I remember sitting there and they were chatting about something, and I don't remember the exact details of what they were chatting about, but I remember how I felt in that moment. This is years ago, probably, I don't know, 8-9 years ago. But I remember feeling like, wow, that's a freaking great idea. Like, how did I never think about that? And I remember it just sort of, not that I ever had this negative association of like women can't do this or that or whatever, but it was just so different and crazy and a different perspective. And it was very refreshing. So it's always stood out as a moment to me of like, hey, this is what's happening. So I appreciate, you helping that female voice get out there, because I think it's lacking right now, and it needs to be louder and more well heard.
Yeah, and I think something I learned recently on that, and it really struck home to me, and it really connected back to the work that I did in the Women's Network originally and everything ever since, was that you have the hero's journey. So everyone knows the hero's journey. There's the guy, and he has a mission, but he's not equipped for it yet. So he gets kicked out of his village or goes on some kind of odyssey. He meets the guide who gives him the skills or knowledge that he needs, and then he goes back and saves his village. But there's also the heroine's journey, and you see this in like Frozen and Moana and all these like wonderful films with a female lead, that the heroine leaves the village, but she doesn't leave the village to find a guide who's going to give her skills. She finds a guide who helps her believe in herself. Like with Frozen, she already had everything within her. She just didn't realize that. And then she comes back and with that new inner strength, manages to save the village or whatever. And I think that's where having these female networks, having female panels is really powerful, because women learn a lot from each other and help each other see that light within themselves. And that's the key there, I think. So yeah, maybe that's another message for the guys out there that want to empower the women, is just helping them see that what they already have within them, because they don't need more skills. They just need more self-belief.
That's perfect. I love it. Awesome. So where can people check you out, find you, see your stuff, potentially have you coach them if they want? Where do they go?
for a long time, I was trying to think, what would I call my business? And then I remember being at a dinner party and so, where would I find you? And I said, oh, just put Melitta Campbell into anything and you'll find me. And it's like, oh. So put Melitta Campbell, that's Melitta with 2 T's, into Google or any social media platform and you'll find me.
Perfect. Well, thank you for being on. Truly appreciate having you here. And for everyone else listening, as always appreciate your time. I understand that you have a lot of podcasts you can listen to, so it's awesome that you've chosen to listen to this one. As always, payment for this great interview is simply sharing it. Find someone else out there. You know, another female entrepreneur that needs to find her voice. Share this so that she can start to do that, because I think that's going to really create a better world. And look, you never know who sharing one little thing might impact someone else out there. So as always as well, please make sure you rate, review, subscribe, click the buttons, notifications on all the places, whether you're watching this on video, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher. I don't know. There's like 9 million other places where this thing goes out to. So wherever you are, I appreciate you being on. Just let everyone else know that this is here for them to enjoy and take away knowledge from too. And we'll see you guys on another episode next week. Thanks so much. Bye.